Oh, man. I'm sorry. Over on Facebook, on YouTube, I just realized I neglected to hit my go live button. I thought I'd had it set up so that the damn thing would automatically go. So my apologies. I screwed up. I already went through my lengthy introduction, which is appearing over on Twitch. And I also have I'm trying to get it to go to Facebook simultaneously, but it's telling me it's waiting for the stream for reasons I don't understand. I have been working on this for half the week. I actually did it successfully. I who the hell knows, right? Who the hell knows? I've given up trying to figure it out anymore. I'll figure it out offline as to what the hell happened with Facebook. And again, I apologize to my viewers on YouTube because I didn't start the thing when I actually started the stream. So my apologies. I'm going to change the way that I do these now that I'm simulcasting out of OBS. I'll change it so that it automatically starts when I start the stream. So sorry. Anyway, our total Lancaster County population, to back up just a little bit, remains roughly constant at 324,216. Total number of positive tests is at 29,995, which is up 344 from last week. This continues a downward trend of our increases. Yes, it's going up, but the number of increases peaked a long time ago. This has, in fact, been statistically the same minor increase for several weeks now, maybe a month. I haven't caught it that closely. Number of positive cases that are classified as recovered is 26,871. Now, given that there's only been 228 deaths, that leaves some 26,643 people in some kind of weird Schrodinger's cat style limbo as both recovered and not recovered. Total number of completed vaccinations is up to 68,261, which is up 9,254 from last week, making the percentage of the population that has been vaccinated at 21.06%, which is up 12.83% from last week, as has been the case for every single week going through this so far. Given the rates of increases that we've seen and how they really haven't changed at all, we'd have to say that this vaccine is having absolutely no effect whatsoever. Total number of deaths in Lancaster County is now up to 228, which is up 1 from last week. For comparison, by the way, the number of people who died of heart failure, heart disease, in 2019 was 485, which means that over roughly 1.25 years, rolling off into past that, the number of people who died from the virus remains less than half the number who died of heart disease in only 2019. Kind of tells you exactly how much of a problem we actually have. Deaths as a percentage of positive cases is 0.76%, which is down 0.005% from last week. It's really statistically identical. It has been for months now. Deaths as a percentage of population is 0.007%, no change from last week, and statistically the same more or less since the pandemic has appeared. There has been no significant change. So, looks like I got one viewer over on the YouTube side, maybe more. I can't tell for sure. It may be only 0 viewers. Maybe it's 1. Who knows? I can't tell much of anything anymore. I can't quite tell on the Twitch side, and Facebook is being mean to me. Let me see if there's anything I can do about this Facebook thing. Bear with me for just a moment to see if I can figure out why it ain't working. So there's my... Let's take a look at Facebook. The Live API 44, Live API-S. Yeah, that's the one. Well, if you started out with me over on Facebook, sorry, ain't working. I love all this stuff. Last week, I got into serious trouble even trying to do multi-streaming. And this week I found that some bright cookie, fortunately, had gone out and made a new plugin for OBS, Open Broadcast Software, which is what I use for my streaming. It's what I use for all of my recording of, individual standalone videos. And they'd made a cool little deal that lets you multi-stream straight out of OBS. I was a little bit worried about the bandwidth on the outside going out, but hey, it don't matter. I got bandwidth coming to my ears, apparently. Okay, so since I don't seem to have a lot of viewers sitting in the YouTube or Twitch sides, let me go off to something here real quick that I was going to go a little bit later. But hey, what the hell? We can talk about it now kind of while I wait for some people to straggle on in. We have a superhero birthday. According to a calendar published by DC Comics in 1972, this is the birthday of one Alfred Pennyworth. Now, for the 0.00001% of viewers who don't know, Alfred Pennyworth is Bruce Wayne's very loyal, tireless butler. He's a legal guardian at various times in Bruce's life. He's his best friend, an aide-de-camp, and a surrogate father figure following the murder of Bruce's parents. The character first appeared in Batman number 16 in April of 1943. However, there's a lot of evidence, I didn't know this till I went to look it up, that Alfred was actually created by the writers of the 1943 Batman serial, Victor McLeod, Leslie Swabacker, and Harry Fraser. DC Comics then asked Don Cameron to write, there he is, by the way, the first appearance of Alfred in the form that we know him. You'll notice here, by the way, that he's reading Detective Comics. That was where Batman first appeared. DC then asked Don Cameron to write the first Alfred story, which was published prior to the serial's release. I mean, it started out in the serial, but then it was published first. You get into weird things like that. As is always the case, various characters tend to have parts of them bleed over from one medium to another. So Alfred was originally, believe it or not, conceived as a comic foil for Batman and Robin. He spoke with a Cockney accent and simply arrived on Wayne Manor's doorstep to announce that he was beginning his duties. And in most earliest tales, he actually made bungling attempts to be a detective that was not on par with his older counterparts or his masters. He even had for a while a four-page feature of his own called The Adventures of Alfred that started in Batman number 22 in April of May 1944. This feature then lasted 13 issues and followed a very simple formula, with Alfred solving the crime by catching the culprits entirely by accident. In later years, of course, the comedic aspects of this character were all downplayed and mostly gotten rid of, aside from a certain list. This is him, by the way, his very first appearance. Mostly in favor of other things. He is today written as a classically trained British actor and an ex-Special Operatives executive operative with connections to the intelligence community. So that is our superhero birthday of the day. One Alfred Pennyworth. So, I guess I got a few viewers. I'll go ahead and get into the meat of this crap. Have a second while I check out something on Facebook. As I said, I'm trying to be ready to start it. Yes, I did start it, you worthless piece of crap. Thank you for giving me that little heads up. Facebook telling me I need to be ready to start the thing some 12 minutes ago. Thanks, Facebook, I know. Yeah. I got some kind of control panel in front of me. I don't understand why it's not picking me up. It should be. Oh, well. I wonder if I need to use a paired encoder. Pardon me while I'm looking at this to see if I'm getting anything. Of course not. Yup, it's waiting for the live video. It's using the stream key. Well, Baveth. I don't know what happened. It was working earlier this week. I love it when a plan comes together. So let me talk about how most people, and this unfortunately means most Americans, in my opinion, are willing to become slaves. This is something that may very well be genetic. It was something I noticed because those of my regular viewers know that I have a sort of varied background. I grew up in this small city of Lincoln, Nebraska, currently 324,000-ish people. At the time that I was growing up here, it was only about 150,000, depending on which year you happen to catch me. I also had my grandparents who had a working cattle ranch in some very, very rural South Dakota. It's so rural there, in fact, that the part of the land that's still in the family, it is basically 2 miles to the nearest paved road. It's ruts from there to it's not paved, but gravel road. It's another 45 miles into town on a gravel road before you hit any paved road. And there's a lot of times during the year when it may not even be navigable out there because of various geographical features, the fact that the county doesn't always go through and reliably even do the gravel roads. You're pretty much on your own. And it's far enough out that if there's a high population of rattlesnakes out there. If I was taught very early on how to self-treat for rattlesnake bites. And, if you get bit by a rattler out there, you have two choices. You can either treat yourself or lay down and die wherever it is you happen to be. Treat yourself, get in the car, in the pickup, in the Jeep in my case, and make it to town or else you're going to die. So what I noticed over time was that there is a significant difference between the way that people in urban areas, even in cities, like 150,000, like when I was growing up, as opposed to people in rural areas approach everyday life. In a rural area like that, you really do have to kind of be very self-dependent. You have to be able to rely on yourself over anyone else. It's certainly true that out there you will get a lot of help from neighbors, but the neighbors could be 5 miles away. You have to rely on yourself to a large extent. It means that the average person out there has to be a generalist. You can't just know one thing. You have to know how to fix heavy equipment. You have to know how to run heavy equipment. You have to know some veterinary stuff in order to be able to treat your livestock. You have to know some human biology. One of my uncles did not wait to get to the hospital to be born. It was my grandfather who delivered him. You basically have to just be very self-sufficient, and you can't rely on other people. You get into cities, and you get into what is basically a large, web of interpersonal relationships that have to do with what people do in order to survive. So for me, for example, I'm an IT wonk. I spent some time on my grandparents' ranch when I was growing up. I love the place. Still go there when I can for vacations. But and I know how to do that. I know how to live out there. I know what to look for in terms of the rattlesnakes and all that. But I am not anybody who ever grew up on a rural cattle ranch. I just have some experience with it, enough to make me barely self-sufficient if I'm not doing anything that matters, and a little bit dangerous. But in real life, I've spent my entire career in places as large as Chicagoland, as small as a town of a couple of thousand, and I've always made it as an IT guy. I have been an engineer, basically building parts of the internet that you're probably still using. I used to work on backbone stuff when I was in Chicagoland, and I've had my hands on things all the way from Chicagoland all the way out to western South Dakota. But I was always an IT wonk. So for me, if I need something done with my car, well, I call the mechanic 4 blocks away and I drive it down there. I know IT, he doesn't employ me, but I'm sure he employs somebody for his IT. He doesn't do it himself. He's got his own business, and he knows how to deal with cars. I know how to deal with IT. And so in order for us to survive, I have to be able to rely on him and many, many other people in terms of, what I'm need in order to live. By the way, I haven't seen anything in chat, which is a little unusual at this point in the chat. I'd appreciate it if somebody would just shoot something on the YouTube side or the Twitch side for that matter, just as an acknowledgement, that you're seeing me. I hate to go through all of this and not have anybody actually see me. It looks like you are on my various control panels here, but I'm never actually sure. I guess I could find out by going out to my let me look at my secondary monitor. Yes, I'm up on my secondary monitor on YouTube. The secondary monitor being my phone. And let's look at Twitch. Yeah, okay. I'm live on Twitch apparently. So I guess that's something. Okay, long press on my avatar. Well, hell, I don't know what. All right, I assume I'm live on Twitch. So, anyhow, yay, Shadow Man. Hey there. I'm glad you're watching me. Good. Just so I got an axe so I know that I'm not talking to myself when I'm saying important stuff like this. Because to me, this is very important. So what you get in cities is this interconnected web of how people need in order to survive. You become less an individualist and more a specialist. And the more specialized you get, and the more things that you depend on, the more things that you think you should be getting for free, like medical care, like your utilities, And all kinds of things that we take for granted is kind of becoming free by virtue of living in a modern mechanized society. Well, I'll tell you what, that's a bad way to go. I had a conversation, in fact, with a good friend of mine, my oldest friend in the world. Had a conversation with him about the concept of socialized medicine. Hey, Shadow Man, stop by. You're listening to me talk about my experiences. Cool. Working on some other stuff while listening to you. Awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, as always. My audience is awesome. So I talked to him about it, and he's from Canada where they have socialized medicine. And he was like, I don't know why the U.S. can't do that. And I said, well, why should it? I mean, why should medicine be not for pay? It's only because of government that it's gotten very expensive. Half a century, 60 years ago, 70 years ago, it was very, very inexpensive. You could get comprehensive medical coverage out of pocket. I always like to use the example. My grandparents had 5 kids that were born in the hospital, with the exception of the one, but they took him to the hospital. They had 5 kids. My grandmother spent a month in the hospital for each of them, and they paid out of pocket. My youngest uncle is only like 10 or 15 years older than I am. So you're not talking about a long period of time before my birth, and I think at my birth you probably could still do it. No, it's due to, and my father was in the healthcare industry, and he knew about this. It's due to tons and tons of government interference, unconstitutionally, I might add, over the course of the last century that's driven up medical costs to where they are now. We don't really have a free market in medical coverage. We really don't. It's been legislated out of existence. So I was talking to my friend, and I was like, well, you have to have it in order to live. And I said, hey, this day and age, you got to have the internet in order to live. You really do. Even with you're not a casual user, somebody who uses the web or watching me or things like that, you still need the internet to live, because at this stage of the game, an enormous amount of information in the business world gets sent over the internet, from business to business. If without the internet, I dare say, civilization would collapse on us. We wouldn't be able to do the things that we are now, because all of this business-to-business information is not being exchanged. If you make a debit on your debit card, right? There's a whole bunch of information. You make the debit, it's going through wherever you're making it, the store that you're making it at, it's going over the internet, and it's ultimately going to get to your bank in pretty damn short order, in point of fact. Short enough so that they can decide whether or not you have overdrawn your account and things like that. All of that stuff goes because of the internet. So I said to him, well, the internet's absolutely necessary for human survival in modern civilization. Should it be socialized? And he didn't have an answer for that. And I think that's because he was sort of leaning towards the notion that, yes, the internet should be socialized and quote-unquote free. I have a sneaking suspicion, and I cannot prove this, but I have a sneaking suspicion that the difference in the way that people in very rural areas like my grandparents' ranch and in urban areas like where I live in larger, even smaller for that matter, it may be genetic. It may be that, in fact, people who are more individualistic, who tend to be more self-sufficient, have genes for it. And the people who aren't don't have the genes for it. It may be that individual liberty cannot survive urbanization, because I think the people in urban areas lack that gene. And in point of fact, they'd be utterly terrified if they had to do for themselves the way that my grandparents had to in their ranch, or I do when I have to go out there. Get bit by a rattler, you either treat yourself, jump in the car, and drive like mad, or you lay down and die where you are. That's just my opinion. Hey, Jason, how's it doing? Just to confirm more than one, hi, glad to see you, Jason. Awesome. My audience is cool. Glad to have you here. So as I say, it may be that, individual liberty can't survive urbanization because you get so many people in large urban areas who are incapable of supporting just themselves and don't have the mindset of doing it. And the longer they're there, the more things that they get that they decide ought to be free, despite the fact that they're ultimately paying for them in taxation. But they think it should be free. Whereas if you're out there, my grandparents' ranch was, no, nothing's free. You get to pay. Shadow Man says, oh, dangerous territory. Well, sort of. Yeah, sort of. It may very, very well be that individual liberty can't survive urbanization, and that's terrifying. That's terrifying to me, because what that ultimately means is that anybody who is not going to deal, in terms of their own being able to live for themselves, is ultimately going to become a slave. And nowhere do we see this, by the way. I love to use government in your bedroom as an example. In order to get married, you have to have a license from the government. Why? Most marriages, my marriage, for example, was, a religious union between myself and my ex-wife. We didn't need a piece of paper from the government to tell us that we were married. The simple ceremony that we have was ample for everyone to know that we were married. The marriage license was just okay, the government requires this. Well, why? It's not the first place that government started getting into things that they have no business being in, because I dare you to find any language in the U.S. Constitution that requires it, and in most state constitutions, it's not required. It's something that was done extra-constitutionally for the most part. So I don't see any reason. It solves this whole problem of gay marriage, right? That's my whole thing about it. Gay marriage is not something that government should be dealing with at all, ever. That's something where, frankly, if you can get somebody to perform a ceremony, in my eyes, you're married, regardless of what the government says. And I think it would radically alter family law in an awfully damned good way. Shadow Man Singh, I agree that these people may not have the mindset, but as long as there being a genetic basis for it, no way. I don't know. The problem is you get a whole bunch of them together in a large area for multiple generations, as has been the case for the most part. As the U.S.'s population shifted from being largely agricultural to largely urban, if there is this, then what you're going to end up with is a lot of interbreeding that breeds out what may be a recessive gene for it. I can't prove it. I don't know how you could, prove it genetically unless somebody identified the gene for individual liberty or something in the human genome, which don't think it's happened. It may just be that over a long period of time they get, adjusted to the fact that, hey, wait a minute, I have to have all these things to survive. It should be free, despite the fact you're paying for it in taxation. But the general acceptance of everyone, and that includes the people who live out where my grandparents did, the general acceptance that you need the government to tell you when you're married, that's ridiculous, just ridiculous. And I know some reasons they do it for, purposes of family law and stuff like that. But if you didn't have that, family law could change dramatically, and probably for the better, because frankly, there's no way that it could change for the worse. Other places I like to look at this in terms of how people have gotten completely used to this notion of being a slave. It's the 9/11 airport security theater. Shadowman says, okay, Bill, then you need to also explain the same deficiency in places like West Virginia and Pennsylvania. I don't know. I don't know enough about what the ratio is of urban population to rural. Philadelphia obviously has a fairly large urban population in places like, I'm sorry, not Philadelphia, but Pennsylvania has Philadelphia. It's got Pittsburgh. Those are very large urban areas. I don't know about West Virginia that much. This is just me rambling. I don't know if it's true or not. It may just be, generations of basically brainwashing, to believe in socialism and communism, particularly the last couple of generations. That's very bad. But also look at things like 9/11 airport security theater, because that does not in any way protect anyone at all, and it never did. I used to work as an international courier between Chicago and Toronto. I would go around downtown Chicago in the Loop, pick up a bunch of stuff, drive it out to O'Hare, get on a plane on Air Canada, and then fly it over, walk it through customs, and deliver it that same night, right? So I'd be up until 3 a.m. or something. That was before, faxes were still a thing back then. But the vast majority of what we used to carry were canceled checks that were time sensitive, right? You get, 1,000 canceled checks in Chicago. Well, you got to get them across the border, hopefully before your exchange rate changes too much. So they were time sensitive, and we had to carry that stuff back and forth. So I have flown enough to know a dozen different ways to cause havoc in airports and on aircraft. And I've listened to pilots talk and flight attendants talk, and they know it's a pointless exercise in futility. In 20 years now, go back and look and see what the TSA has actually caught and what they have actually failed. What they have caught is nothing. What they have failed is every examination. Some, the air marshals will go through and try to trip them up, and they always do. There is no use for it, none whatsoever. And I can tell you why very simply, because one of my specialties was IT security. And while some of the concepts that you learn for that don't directly translate over one-to-one to physical security, part of that training is physical security, because you may be responsible for tens of thousands, maybe millions of dollars worth of physical equipment. It's real simple why airport security is pointless, right? In real security, what you do is you have a thing that you're trying to, get security around. You build up a perimeter around it, right? Essentially with guards or electronics or whatever needs to happen on the external of that perimeter. And you only allow into your perimeter a small number of people who have been pre-screened, right? So if, when I did it, if you're working on a big data center with millions of dollars worth of computing equipment inside of it, then you have the data center very carefully, set up so that you can't do something simple like, carve through the walls with a chainsaw or anything like that, very hardened. And you have only one or two doors, and the doors often are man traps, which is where you give your security credentials at the first door, walk in, the first door closes, you give your security credentials again, the second door opens, but you can't go through both doors simultaneously. So if you screw up, you're stuck in this man trap. So that's how you do real physical security. I mean, the most obvious one is if you have like a military encampment, you will set up guards, and they will only let through people who are authorized to be there, right? That's how real security works. That's how it works everywhere for everything. There are no exceptions. Airport security theater tries to do it in the reverse, which is they have a perimeter, but they allow in everyone except a few select people that they're trying to screen out. Well, that's impossible. It's just plain impossible. Ask anyone who deals with real security, and they will tell you that that is an impossible model. And in point of fact, if you put that around the president, if you said, okay, we're going to let everybody through to see him, but we're only going to try to stop a few people, I guarantee that the president's lifespan could be measured in minutes. That's exactly what they do with him at all times. They have perimeters around him. Sometimes those perimeters are physical. Sometimes, they're all physical to some extent. But the stuff that really, really makes Secret Service people nervous is when he goes out in public, because then they really are kind of trying to do that. They try to keep a perimeter around him, but when he's going out to, when Trump went out to talk to, 10,000 people in an arena, oh my God, I can't imagine being with Secret Security. I would just be terrified the whole time he was there. All it would take would be one nut, because the reality is, if you want to assassinate the president, you can. You just have to be willing to die yourself. That's the caveat. If you're going to kill the president, you have to be willing to die in the attempt, because you probably will be killed, either, probably after you did it. But I'm sure that those kind of rallies probably drove them completely insane. I'm sure there were lots and lots of ulcers in the people who were doing President Trump's security detail in Secret Service. So airport security theater is a pointless exercise in futility. It has been for 21 years. And the only thing that it's done, and I called it at the time because I knew back then, in 2000 rather, I got my Certified Information System Security Professional certification, which is the highest security certification that you can get in the industry. And so I'd had this training in physical security. And I knew it was a pointless waste of time when 9/11 came around. And I called it back then. I said, all this is going to do is not going to protect anyone. Trust me, it doesn't. I could figure out a dozen ways to go through and cause mayhem. It's not going to protect anyone. What it will do, however, is condition generations of Americans that they have no rights in airports or on aircraft. And lo and behold, that's precisely what has happened. There is now no condition under which we will ever let that security go, despite the fact that it's pointless. Anybody in security will tell you that it's pointless. Any pilot, any flight attendant will tell you that it's pointless. But we're never going to get rid of it now because people were too willing at the time to gleefully hand over their liberty to government. And that's what's happened right now with this virus whose name that I cannot mention. We are now at a point where we have essentially created a world filled with hypochondriac monsters, Karens who will go after you for, as they did with me, going into a fast food place that has an open dining room where, you know, the tops dividing the various eating areas were this big. If you were over on one side, there wasn't anything that was stopping it. And these Karens were like, oh my God, how come you're not wearing your mask? Because nobody ever comes in there with a mask. And I said, well, look around you. We're all breathing the same air. Oh, what about that guy behind? What about the server and stuff behind at the front? He's taking your order. You mean the one who's behind the layer of plexiglass? You mean the one who, you know, hands stuff out the drive-through and they don't do anything in terms of trying to stop you? I mean, ridiculous. Hey, over on my Twitch side, Dalton Brazier, nice to see you here tonight. I am apparently successfully streaming over there. I am not successfully streaming over on Facebook, and I don't know why. So, actually, I have one thing I could check on Facebook. Let me do that, because it drove me nuts. I was able to do it. And it was able to be happening when I was doing testing over the week. No, it's not there. Of course not. Of course not. Why would it be? So I'm going to have to fix that over the week. I'm trying to do all three of those. Anyhow, it's pointless. All it ever does, and it did, was condition two entire generations of Americans that they have no rights on airports. And now we have the Karens who are going nuts. And even in my city, where we only have 228 deaths as of yesterday, 0.07% of the population, it's ridiculous. Everybody has become a hypochondriac, right? Everybody has become a hypochondriac. They're now insisting that we have to have vaccinations and talking about vaccine passports and crap like that. This is handing over your body to the government. Handing it over, just giving it out. And trust me, if once they have conditioned you that it's okay to do it for one thing, they will do it for all kinds of other things. I mean, they already, unfortunately, got into it when you get into things like drug interdiction, alcohol interdiction, smoking, etc. These are all things that are largely victimless crimes. And if you want to screw up your own body, well, as a friend, I'm going to try to tell you to stop. I'm going to try to get you to go in for, rehab. But ultimately, it's your body. But no, we have already given that over to government. And that set its precedent where now we are giving over what we're doing in terms of giving ourselves any kind of vaccinations. It's ridiculous. It is training Americans. And, you don't have to work hard on the last two because they were brainwashed in K through 12 and often in college to be communists. So you don't have to work hard for them. But you have just started handing over your liberty on an unconditional basis. And it'll happen again. The thing is, when it's safe, honestly, when it's safe means never. If it isn't this thing, it'll be the next thing. They were so damn good at getting you completely riled up over something that nationally has an incredibly tiny fatality rate and a recovery rate that's very high. And here in my city, it is really a non-issue if the mayor and the governor would just say the truth, that it's a non-issue. But they're just like everybody else. They see themselves as king of their own little fiefdom. So that if you gleefully hand over your freedoms to them, they will gleefully take them, and they will never, ever give them back. We also see this when it comes to gun control. The correct term for gun control, by the way, is not gun control. It's victim disarmament. And we know this because the eminent Dr. John Lott, who is a statistician, wrote an incredible book that goes through the statistics called More Guns, Less Crime. We know for a fact, over a course of several generations now worth of FBI statistics, that any state that enacts a concealed carry law sees a drop in their level of violent crime, while any neighboring state that may not have one, that doesn't have one, sees an increase. Why? Very simple. The bad guys want easy targets. They want easy victims. They want victims who have been disarmed by their government. When you have the ability to protect yourself, they don't want to die. They leave. So when we get into the victim disarmament side of it, very recently, of course, what's happened, I think today, President Biden came out with some new victim disarmament laws. And he's pushing for red flag laws in the states and a federal red flag law. I would, point out that neither of these would be constitutional. In my state, there is no constitutional authority for the state government to have something like that. And there's certainly no authority for a locality to do it. And there's absolutely no authority in the U.S. Constitution. I dare you to find where it says that you can have a federal law that is a red flag law. Those things are so damn dangerous. What with the woke becoming what they are, and there being new woke incidents of cancel culture and all kinds of other stuff, having a red flag law is just really, really dangerous. What that means is if it's enacted, anybody with a gun is going to be a target of anyone else. If you get outed on social media as a gun owner, that means the woke are going to come down and start calling the feds and telling you that there's a red flag, this guy's going to harm people, even if you won't. And I guarantee it's going to result in your guns being confiscated and never given back. We have been conditioned to believe things that are not true. We have been conditioned to believe that we do not have rights when we do. And the fact that people are so willing to just throw their rights away, in a large number, my audience is probably very different, but in large numbers, much larger than there are those of us who don't want to throw away our liberties, the fact that so many people are willing to throw these things away tells me that maybe they just don't have a problem with becoming slaves. We'll get into stuff like gun confiscation right now. I have been hearing for years that gun confiscation is the tripwire for the military, that people in the military and veterans will not stand for gun confiscation, and that things militarily will start to happen. I don't believe them for a nanosecond. I think they're lying to themselves. And the reason I think this is because over the course of my 57 years on this planet, I have watched that tripwire constantly move back. They'll say, oh, if they do this, then we'll do something. And then they do it. The tripwire is hit. And they go, well, if they do this other thing, then we'll do something. And then that tripwire is hit. And they move it again and say, oh, well, if this thing happens, then we'll do something. Never happens. And I do not believe anybody anymore who tells me any different. I think they are just as willing to become slaves. Maybe it is that some of them lack the historical, background that I have and can see how this tripwire has constantly been moving and no one has ever done what they'd say. I don't know. But I think they're just lying to themselves. I think if it came down to it, they will not do a damned thing. They will sit there and allow them to be taken. And trust me, Gun confiscation in a major way is the next step on the road to slavery. If we get something like, socialized medicine, road to slavery, because then the government has control of your body completely. 100% control of your body. You think they're going, if you're like me, right, and you're not making them any money, because I'm not working anymore, I'm retired, so I'm not making them any money in taxation. Do you really think that they're going to put me as their number one guy if they, say I need a heart transplant? You think they're going to put me at the top of that list? Hell no. I'm going down to the bottom. I'm old. I'm a guy who isn't making them any money. Why would they want to keep me alive? I'm a burden on society. Jason Hand says gun control does nothing to stop those with the will and the means to commit harm to another. Absolutely, yeah. Laws only affect those willing to follow the laws and not the lawbreakers. We have gun control in Australia. Oh, you're also from Australia, cool. And still have shooting/gunshots on the news. Yeah, well, that's nobody who's in favor of victim disarmament can ever answer this simple question: what's to keep criminals from getting guns? Right? We have an incredibly porous southern border, and besides, by the way, I don't think your average blood or crip is going down to the gun store and waiting a couple of weeks and buying a handgun. I'm reasonably certain they're buying it on the black market to start with. So we have this incredibly porous southern border. Do you really think that we're going to keep out guns from Mexico? I think not. So tell me, victim disarmers, how's that going to work? You're just going to pass the law and you figure the Bloods and the Crips are going to abide by it, do you? You think, oh, okay. They're going to go, oh, I didn't get it until now. I shouldn't shoot people. Oh, thank goodness they passed a law. No, they won't. Dr. John Lott clearly showed more guns is less crime, and it's just that simple. So it seems to me, unfortunately, that the overwhelming majority of my countrymen, and probably people worldwide, are now so brainwashed by the concept of socialist, various things being free, socialist programs for this, that, and the other thing, and the notion that, government, an all-powerful central government, is somehow going to make it all work is ridiculous. Let me see if I can pull up something. I know I've got it around here, a card that I use for other purposes, because I can explain why this just won't work. The masks. Hopefully this won't have anything weird in it when I find it. Sorry, you're having to sit through me scrolling through all of the various cards I have to find it. Did not occur to me to put into the rotation for this tonight. American subcultures. There we go. Ho! Hey, only missing a couple of things. Shadow Man says, I'm a gun owner. I'm not going to worry about it until I see a serious threat to the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment has been 100% gutted over the course of the last century. You are a victim of that constantly moving goalpost, that constantly moving tripwire. The Second Amendment largely is not for anything except being able to fight a tyrannical government. It has now wasted away to the point where, your gun will be good for protecting yourself against criminals, but almost useless in terms of protecting yourself against tyrannical government. For that, you need access to fully automatic weapons, armored vehicles, tanks, jets, and conceivably even nukes. Because they have them, so if you want to counter them, you've got to have them too. The issue of nukes is a very thorny one for libertarians. Unless somebody asks, I'll leave my own opinions on that alone. But if the government's going to have all of this armaments, you've got to have the exact same armaments, or you're in serious trouble. Don, I'm going to watch the chat for Twitch over here, but I'm going to have the one up here because I'd have to spend some time getting it in. So the reason that a central government, and I've thrown this up before, my regular viewers will have seen this, the reason central government won't work in the United States is because there is not one single culture in the United States, and there is not one single way of living in the United States. It's it varies a lot. there are at least a dozen subcultures in the United States that are broken out largely along geographic and economic lines. I always like to throw this up here because to me it's a very interesting indication of this. Now, it isn't even a guilty pleasure. Since I was a young man, really, maybe a teenager, I've been sort of a fan of professional wrestling, but not modern professional wrestling. It seems too much like stage soap opera. When you had, kind of pro wrestling before WWE took it over, I kind of like that stuff. I mean, it's not real. The match outcomes, and I don't want to say that the athletes aren't doing an amazing job, but the match outcomes were and always have been predetermined. But one of the things I found out, I grew up, what they did was in 1954, a bunch of guys who ran territories all over the United States got together and they formed the National Wrestling Alliance, which still exists today, although in a very abortive form. The National Wrestling Alliance then took where all of these guys had their territories, carved them up, and said, this is your territory. Nobody else can come in here and promote and book matches. You're the only one that can do that. And if someone does come in and tries to compete with you, all of the rest of us are obliged to send our best talent down there to drive them out. And the one thing that they had was they recognized a unified world heavyweight champion. The last one of those was Ric Flair. There is one now, but again, you'd have to hunt very hard to find NWA as opposed to WWE. NWA largely turns into a jumping off point. People who do things in NWA aren't getting paid anywhere near as much as they would in WWE, so the moment WWE comes calling, they tend to jump ship. So these were the territories they carved up. Now, I lived, when I was growing up, right here in Purple Territory. That's about the location of Lincoln, Nebraska, where I am now. That Purple Territory was the American Wrestling Association, which was run, promoted, and their champion was Vern Gagne. Now, a lot of things happened. A couple of these territories broke away. AWA was one of them, American Wrestling Association. The Worldwide Wrestling Federation, which was up here in the Northeast, broke off, became the WWF, and is now the WWE, and they expanded and bought everything. But the reason that I count these as this is a good map of various cultures within the United States is this. I only grew up ever watching AWA stuff, right? You never saw anybody else's territory. You only ever saw your own. So now in the age of the internet, well, it turns out on YouTube, there's all kinds of people who made VHS recordings from about the 1970s till the 1990s of their local professional wrestling. And I found when watching these that they had a very different style to each of them. Now, Vern Gagne, the guy who ran the AWA, was at one time was an actual amateur wrestler. He wrestled in college. He was an alternate to the 1948 Olympics wrestling team. And what he usually did with his territory, with the AWA, is he would try to sell it as a real sporting match that had different rules from amateur wrestling, but was still a real sporting match. If you had wrestlers that came from other territories and went up there, ordinarily, when you had somebody come from another territory, you didn't talk about anything that they'd done anywhere else. But he would stress whatever titles they may have held in other territories. He would, talk about their amateur backgrounds if they had any. Guy would go so far. I'll never forget the 1984 Olympics. He went so far as to get a couple of the Olympic hopefuls they weren't yet on the team, but they were just, working that out. But he got a couple of those guys, a couple of these kids from college who were Olympic hopefuls, come on and do a regular, amateur style match. And he was the referee for that match. And he would, he did the whole thing and he was explaining, okay, now you see they're doing this. This is different from professional wrestling. If these guys go pro, because he would always talk about that, taking these amateur wrestlers and going pro. And among other things, some of the most weirdest ones was in that same 1984 Olympics when they finally got down to the Olympics. They did have some people from University of Minnesota, I think, who made the Olympic team for that year. And he would push them. Not only would he push his own matches in the arenas and stuff, he would push the 1984 Olympics because he had this kind of connection to him, and he thought, and he did. Some of these guys did come out of there and become professional wrestlers. Not many, but some. And he would have those guys, it was the weirdest damn thing. You'd see somebody who was, known for being big and braggadocious and, not Hulk Hogan. He wasn't around. Well, he was, but he didn't do that. But people like Blackjack Lanza, who was a guy who was, I'm going to go and I'm going to get this guy, I'm going to kill him. And all of a sudden, he damn near dropped character to talk about the Olympics. It was the weirdest transition back and forth. He'd be talking about I was going to get the guy he was, in a match for soon. And then he would stop and say, yes, and I'd like to talk to you about, the Olympics and the professional, we're really looking forward to watching these guys. You can see them on such and such network and, go and watch them and support them, blah, blah, blah. And by the way, I'm going to get this guy that it was just amazing. So that was his way of pushing his product up here in the purple area. That was his way of pushing it. And by the way, he also got into some of the white area later in life and also out to California, had some deals going on with Portland Wrestling up in Washington and thereabouts, but in Oregon. But that's how he pushed his product as a legitimate sporting event. You got down to Memphis, and I've watched a lot of Memphis wrestling. You got down to Memphis, totally different way of packaging things. If somebody from the AWA went down to the Memphis territory and tried to do the exact same thing in Memphis that they did in the AWA, they'd have been laughed out of the arena. It was just totally different. And if someone from Memphis came up, and that happened from time to time, Jerry the King Lawler was from Memphis. If he came up to the AWA, he changed his tune. He changed how he packaged himself, because if he didn't, he'd have been laughed out of the arena. You go down to, Texas. Well, they had a reputation, and I've seen them, for being what's called a strong-armed sort of territory, which is guys, these guys got injured all the time, and you rarely, caught on. But there was a higher chance of being significantly injured in Texas because they were a little bit more aggressive about their work. They called it strong-armed. So I started looking at this, and I realized that what we're actually seeing here are different subcultures within the United States. You get Memphis has one subculture, and so when you market a product like this to them, you market it a certain way. Upper Great Plains, where I am, we have a different subculture, and so you market differently to us. Get down in Texas, a different subculture, market differently to them, and so on, throughout all of these various territories. In fact, that's why they were carved up this way in the first place, because the promoter in that territory knew how best to package their product to sell it to the local culture. This is a very good representation of what subcultures in the United States look like. Now, all that said, this should tell you volumes about why you can't have a central government based in Washington that is going to be able to serve every single one of these people so that they equally feel like they're being served. You get them socialized medicine, and I guarantee that what will happen is that people in major metro areas will get better care than people who don't live in major metro areas. I guarantee it, just guarantee it, because of the way they've been trained to think of wanting and getting things for free with taxation. So this is why you can't do it. This is why the best government, if you're going to have one, the best government is closest to home. Your state government, your city government, whatever. The best government is the one that's closest to home. They're the ones that are going to be inside this culture and know how to make things work so that this culture has a good chance of success. But when you put the needs of someone, and this is about where my grandparents' ranch was in South Dakota, you take the needs of somebody who's living 50 miles away from town, down a gravel road and then ruts. And, you say, okay, we're going to make them exactly the same as New York City. That's freaking ridiculous. What it really represents is a large amount of provinciality. What I mean by that is the average person will be born, live, and die within 200 miles of where they were born. Generally speaking, that's true. It's very unusual, and this is one of the things I market about my show, to have somebody like me who has been in just an extremely rural area, been in a small city a lot, spent 10 years in Chicagoland, and I can see where each of those can get very provincial. These people here, my grandmother, she went when my grandfather joined the Navy in World War II. Well, she took a trip with two of my uncle and my father in tow to Great Lakes Training Center up, off of Lake Michigan, north of Chicago. Completely confused the whole time. Just had no idea. If it wasn't for strangers helping her get from point A to point B, she was totally confused. Didn't have a slightest clue. Just lost, completely lost. And I get it. I lived there, so that's her level of provinciality. She was prepared for how people live out here, and that's radically different from how they live right here. Same thing is true for people who live right here in Chicago. They have no conception of what the reality is when you get out into this purple area, or even this one here, which is Iowa, or some of the stuff below it. No clue how they operate. It's very, very provincial. And so it is extremely provincial for anyone to think that you can make laws in Washington, D.C. that are going to adequately and fairly cover everyone in the country when they have totally different ways of living. A coal miner is totally different in their needs than somebody up here in South Dakota. Totally different. You can't do it. It's impossible. It will always fail. And it will fail at the expense of those who, like me, are not putting money into the coffers. I am dead certain that, if it came down to it, they would put me dead last for any kind of service. Just absolutely certain. Why would they? Why wouldn't they? This is all just indications of how people are more than happy to become slaves. More than happy to turn over their liberties whenever the government says that they should turn them over. Unfortunately, I cannot say anything other than most people, not my audience, because you guys are cool. Most people want to be slaves. Whether they think of it in those terms or not, when you're handing over your liberty for any reason, what you really want to be is a slave. So that's probably all I got to say about the slave stuff. I don't see an answer for it. We have 2 whole generations that were brainwashed in public schools and private schools for 12 years to believe that communism and socialism are good and that they should be implemented in the United States. Not understanding the history of particularly the last century, which shows clearly that communism and socialism always fail, killing millions in the process. So let me slip over, and we will start talking about this week's woke report. Oh my God. With the election of President Biden, the woke have decided that it is absolutely open season. Anything that they can do, they will get away with, and they have. And clearly from the success that social media and the press had in their extraordinary amount of propaganda. It's my honest belief that were it not for the propaganda, President Trump would probably have been reelected very handily. But they were propagandized too, and social media, explicitly interfered with the election to the point where, if you know me, and you've seen back on some of my pre-recorded videos, I tried very hard to get with Senator Ben Sasse, one of my senators, who sits on the Senate Judiciary Committee, because I wanted to tell him, and I would love to tell him, but it's pointless now, that this was the big it, that they had to do something. Because if they didn't, this election would have been the first not free, not fair election. And I don't mean it in the terms necessarily that President Trump put it in. He talked about a lot of things as though he knew it for absolute factual certainty. I don't know that you could know that for absolute factual certainty. What I do know is, as someone who's trained in security, there were a lot of attack vectors in this last election that were not present in prior elections. So you'd have to ask yourself, well, is it reasonable to assume that someone with malicious intent took advantage of those attack vectors? Yeah. Given what was at stake, absolutely. So I wanted to tell him about it. I wanted to tell him what he could do, what he should do. But he failed to meet with me. Some flunky talked to me, basically blew me off by saying, oh, we've got experts in Washington who advise us on this. And what I said to him was, as he's walking away from me and blown me off, I said to him, well, if they're not telling you what I just told you, they're not experts. But of course, he didn't listen to me. Now the time has passed. We will never again in this country have elections that are free from propagandizing and from interference by social media and YouTube and other places. They were extraordinarily successful, and so they're going to do it again. And they're entrenched now in terms of how they do it. They will not be stopped. There is no way to stop it. We will never again have an election that truly represents the will of the people. That's gone. It's over. They had their chance this time around. They blew it. Done. Finished. So the woke report, as I say, they've pretty much gone and said, hey, our guy is in. We have had success. We are now entrenched. It is time to go completely on the offensive. I could go on and on and on about all the woke stuff that they've been doing. Cancel culture has been hitting science fiction, fantasy, etc. It's been hitting bigger things. I'm going to talk about some of the bigger things and not so much the smaller stuff. Shannon Man says, you're having company, got to go. Thanks for the stream. You betcha. Okay, great. Great to have you back whenever you come in. As always, when I start the woke report, I must always bring in the beautiful, charming, and extremely intelligent Tulsi Gabbard.
The mob that stormed the Capitol on January 6th to try to stop Congress from carrying out its constitutional responsibilities were behaving like domestic enemies of our country. But let's be clear. The John Brennans, Adam Schiffs, and the oligarchs in big tech who are trying to undermine our constitutionally protected rights and turn our country into a police state with KGB-style surveillance are also domestic enemies, and much more powerful and therefore dangerous than the mob that stormed the Capitol. Now, John Brennan said,
so I know looking forward that the members of the Biden team who have been nominated or have been appointed are now moving in laser-like fashion to try to uncover as much as they can about what looks very similar to insurgency movements that we've seen overseas, where they germinate in different parts of the country and they gain strength, and it brings together an unholy alliance frequently of religious extremists, authoritarians, fascists, bigots, racists, nativists, even libertarians.
Now, President Biden, I call upon you and all members of Congress from both parties to denounce these efforts by the likes of Brennan and others to take away our civil liberties that are endowed to us by our Creator and guaranteed in our Constitution. If you don't stand up to these people now, then our country will be in great peril.
Oh, Tulsi, will you please just divorce your present husband, acquire a taste for men with somewhat questionable physiques, and please marry me. You have an open, it's an open proposition. You may marry me at any time. I will play that sucker over and over and over and over until people get it. I'm a libertarian, so apparently I'm a member of an unholy alliance with all these other people, and I don't know how they're defining libertarians, religious extremists, or authoritarians. In point of fact, Brennan, you are the authoritarian here. Certainly not libertarians. We're not authoritarians. Ridiculous. It's just a matter of time, frankly, I think, before they come for libertarians and the other people they mentioned in those groups. As I say, I'm going to show that thing forever. It'll be a standard fixture whenever I go into the woke report. Remember, Democrats, this is what you could have had as your nominee rather than a doddering old fool who sadly suffers from senile dementia. And that is incredibly obvious from that one press conference he gave that was just embarrassing. It wasn't so much that it was embarrassing for him, because it was, but it engendered a feeling of embarrassment in the viewer. If you were not somebody in the press who was sitting there trying to cover for him, which they all did, but if you weren't a member of the press trying to cover for him, it gave anybody who watched it an unsettling, embarrassed feeling. It's similar to when you see a very poor actor or a performer or something like that, a singer who just can't sing, and yet they're up there in front of all these people who are, watching and pretending that they kind of don't hate it, but inside you're going, oh God, I feel so embarrassed for this person. Oh man, I'm uncomfortable. I'm embarrassed for them. It's not that, oh God, I can't believe I have to watch this crap. It's, oh man, when's it going to stop? He's embarrassing himself and he doesn't know it. Oh my God, it's like the times that I've come out with songs. I think I run the risk of when I do those and when I don't, I've only done a couple, is because I give my audience the ability to go, oh my God, he's so embarrassing. So that was obvious just from his one press conference. He's suffering from senile dementia. He can only read off of cards. He doesn't know what he's doing anymore. But that's who you could have had, Democrats. You could have had Tulsi Gabbard, and I think there's a very good chance that with, particularly with all the, propaganda and social media explicitly interfering with the election, I think there's a very good chance that she would have beaten Trump. She could have been president now. Instead, you got a senile, doddering, old racist. And he is a racist. Just listen to his quotes. You could listen to Trump all day long and have a hard time coming up with something that was outright racist. But Biden is just a racist gaffe waiting to happen. And has a long history of doing it, too. So one of the places that the woke has gone nuts is down in Georgia over their voting law. Now, the exact provisions of the voting laws in Georgia, the way it stands right now, I have linked to in my description box. As always, I try to source things. It's at ballotpedia.org/voting _in_Georgia. Please go feel free to look there. What they allow by their current laws is they permit online registration. They will permit no excuse absentee voting and early voting. Means you don't have an excuse. You just can do it anytime. But the one that people object to, the one that's new, is that voters in Georgia are required to present valid photo identification at the polls. Valid IDs include any valid state or federal government issued photo ID, including a free ID that they'll give you, a card issued by your county registrar's office or the Georgia Department of Driver Services, a Georgia driver's license, even if it's expired, a valid employee photo ID from any branch, department, agency, or entity of the U.S. government, Georgia, or any county, municipality, board authority, or any other entity of that state. They will also take a valid U.S. passport, or a valid U.S. military photo ID, or a valid tribal photo ID. The voters can obtain a free voter ID card from any county registrar's office or DDS office. The voter must provide the following in order to receive this card. This is very similar. I'll talk about my state in a minute. You can present a photo ID, a photo identity document or approved non-photo identity document that includes the full legal name and the date of birth. You can provide documentation showing the voter's date of birth, like a birth certificate. You can show evidence that the applicant is a registered voter already. You can show documentation that the applicant's name and residential address. A voter is not required to provide identification when voting absentee by mail. Okay, they're getting all bent out of shape about this. This is extremely similar, if not damn near identical, to the way it works in Nebraska. And has, I think, for my entire life, I'm not absolutely certain about it, but I think for my entire life, it certainly has any time I've been voting. If you want to register to vote, here's what I take down with me, right? I did it in South Dakota because I'd moved there so recently. There was a vote coming up that year. And I'd moved there so recently, I did not yet have a driver's license. So I took my South Dakota issued, I might add, because I was born in South Dakota, my South Dakota issued birth certificate and a utility bill birth certificates to prove who I am and when I was born, the utility bill to prove that I actually lived in the particular, place that I did so that I would be eligible to vote. Okay, that makes sense to me. They want to know who you are. They want to make sure that you actually live there. Why is that a problem? And in terms of presenting an ID, well, in Nebraska, you go down to the voting office, you give them, in this case, I gave them a driver's license, I gave a utility bill to prove that I lived there. They issued me a little card that said I was a libertarian and I could vote. Okay. When I get there, I hand over the card, done. This is not anything that's unusual to Georgia, guys. This is how it's been in Nebraska since forever. I don't even know when it started. My entire adult life, I think. I don't remember for sure when I was 18, but ever since then, when I voted in Nebraska, this has been the exact thing we've done. This has not in any way caused anybody to not be able to vote that I've seen. So for Georgia to put this in there, I'm like, well, that's the least you could do in terms of securing the voting. You should really just put an end to the kind of, general mail-in voting that attaches with it all kinds of attack vectors to subvert that vote. You really shouldn't have that except for absentee balloting. But when you've got, general mail-in, there is, among other things, no chain of custody. When you do absentee ballots, when you do, in-person ballots, there is a chain of custody from your vote to when it's counted. If at any time they want to go back and do a recount, they can always follow that chain of custody backwards. But there is none when it's just general mail-in voting. That's a really bad idea because God knows, that's why we can't tell for sure who the hell won the last election, because there were so many attack vectors nationwide attached to that. But in response to this happening, this new law going into place, that's virtually identical to Nebraska's, and I don't see how it could possibly be a problem. Major League Baseball has moved the 2020 All-Star Game and Draft from Georgia to Coors Field in Denver, Colorado. Delta Airlines has come out and made some statements against the thing, which is amusing because on their website, I looked it up, March 26th, 2021, they made a statement. Delta believes that full and equal access to voting is a fundamental right for all citizens. Over the past several weeks, Delta has engaged extensively with state and state elected officials in both parties to express our strong view that Georgia must have a fair and secure election process with broad voter participation and equal access to the polls. The legislation signed this week improved considerably during the legislative process and expands weekend voting, codifies Sunday voting, and protects a voter's ability to cast an absentee ballot without providing a reason. For the first time, drop boxes have also been authorized for all counties statewide, and poll workers will be allowed to work across county lines. I don't know for sure about that, but that sounds very similar to what we have in Nebraska. I know we have drop boxes. If you go to vote a lot of times, right, there's usually a fairly lengthy line at my polling place, which, as it happens, just purely by geography, is in fact the office. I've forgotten what it is, but it's the office in charge of, it's like the County Election Commission's office, right? So it's not a very large area to do it. So a lot of people will just pick up the ballot, fill it out, and drop it in a drop box that's outside there. And it's still got a chain of custody, because if you get the thing, it has to be signed by the right personnel, and then when you drop it in, there's a chain of custody from there. So that's, it seems to me are virtually identical to what we have. They also said in that March 26th statement, nevertheless, we understand concerns remain over provisions in the legislation, and there continues to be work ahead in this important effort. We're committed to let me get it right here. We're committed to continuing to listen to our people and our communities and engage with leaders from both parties to ensure every eligible employee and Georgia voter can exercise their right to vote. And then the woke attacked, because I've said in my other video, there is no escaping the woke. Well, there is no escaping the woke. They went nuts. They decided that, oh my God, this is keeping black people from voting. And I'm like, how? We've had this in Nebraska since forever. I'm unaware that any black people have been denied the right to vote, and it hasn't really put any crimp. I mean, what you require? See, I'm actually not that much in favor as a libertarian. I'm not that much in favor of having voter ID, but the present situation is such that I think voter ID is a necessity. I think all states should require voter ID for their elections. We are at a place where we just don't know for sure who won the last election. May well have been Biden, just outright freely and fairly. But we just don't know because there are too many attack vectors associated with the way that election was run. So the woke attacked. We had an attack of the woke. And 5 days later, the Delta CEO, Ed Bastian, sent this memo out with the subject in all caps, "Your right to vote." And he said, quote, "Just 2 weeks ago, we honored civil rights icon Ambassador Andrew Young by naming a building on our campus in his honor and establishing a permanent exhibit to his lifelong work in the lobby." Okay, so right off the bat, right, he's appeasing the woke by saying, look, we did something for a black guy. Going on, the building was chosen because it is the first place that new Delta employees visit when they come to work for us, and we wanted them to see on their first day just how closely our mission statement, a mission of connecting the world, intertwined with the work of heroes like Ambassador Young and a former Delta board employee member. That's really why they had the thing up. Whose steady hand has helped save our airline in the dark years following 9/11. That's the real reason they had him up there. The fact that he was black was just a, cherry on the top. But they're going out of the way. Look. We did this thing for black guy. Really, we mean it. We're good guys. Don't stop attacking us. Jason Hand says the machine tallies are not the actual votes, and recounts meant putting back through machines should have been tallied with paper and pen. My opinion as someone who has been in IT, I was in IT for 40 years. There are ways you can secure things electronically, but I think it's a bad idea. I think punch cards are the best way to go. That's nothing more complex technologically than punch cards, I think. Going on, the CEO of Delta said, "For all the pride we take in the achievements of Ambassador Young and other civil rights heroes, many from our own hometown of Atlanta, we know that much work remains to be done to try to establish an equitable society." Stopping there for a moment. BLM, black people who feel like you're really put upon. You have absolutely no historical context. I can tell you that right now is just about the best time to be black that it's ever been. When I was born, using the N-word was not unusual. I remember it because when I was in grade school, we were still using it in the 1970s, early 1970s. It phased out of the public lexicon by the end of the 1970s, right? We have slums and things, but that's caused more by government interference in the family than it is by anything else. We may, in some individual localities, have places where black people of colors other than mine, are to some extent profiled. But it is not it's not a general thing throughout the country. And I know this because I listen to first responder frequencies. And I have a link to them. It scrolls past in my lower third. It's also in my description box on YouTube and will appear on it when this stream is over on the Twitch side. You can see that they if you listen to them for any length of time, the only time anyone's race comes up is if they've got a perpetrator or a suspect that's on the loose, right? And they want to find him. So they'll send out a broadcast to everyone, look for this, male, African-American male, 5'7", wearing a Lakers t-shirt and cut-off jeans and, whatever, right? And that's the only time. And it happens with white people too. right? They'll say, be aware we've got a Caucasian male, age 25 to 30, 5'7", and he's wearing this. That's the only time it comes up, right? It's not like they're going, black person, let's go get him. That doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. If you want to know how it is more, regionally and without outside of your very provincial place that you're living, listen to first responder frequencies from all over the country. You will see that they're not doing that. If they were, you would hear it on the radios. But the only time that race comes up is when they're trying to get someone, and it's pertinent, right? You don't just say a male, age such and such. You want to give out as much identifying information as you possibly can. So that's the only time it comes up. If you're finding that this is occurring where you live, my suggestion is to vote with your feet. Come to the Upper Great Plains. Come to Lincoln, Nebraska, city of 324,000. Go to Omaha, city of 1 million. Go to one of those places. We will welcome you with open arms, and I can guarantee you that our police are not doing any kind of stuff like that. If they go into what they know is a dangerous neighborhood, they will do some profiling based on the fact that it's a dangerous neighborhood. But it doesn't have to be all black. They do the same thing with white. Half of the trailer parks in Nebraska that happen to be largely white. They'll profile the hell out of you there too. But it's only where it makes sense. You go into a bad neighborhood, well, you're going to want to watch out. Whether it's white, black, mixed, indifferent, doesn't matter. But they're not sitting there on their radios talking about black people and how they're going out to get them. By the way, judging from what I'm seeing on the George Floyd trial, I think he's going to be found not guilty, and we can look to more destruction, probably across the country. We have been sitting on the verge of a shooting civil war for some time now. I'm surprised a little bit that it hasn't happened already, but that could conceivably be a trigger. Could conceivably be one. Anyway, going on in this idiot's letter. Oh, and by the way, in terms of the Equitable Society part, right? I mean, I've seen this over the course of my lifetime, getting better and better and better for black people, mostly. Guys, I don't know for sure. I'm not black. I'm not walking in your shoes. I'm a white dude. I get it totally. But it seems to me that you may have just bumped into something that has been with most white people all of our lives. And that is, for most people, life kind of sucks, right? It just kind of sucks. You go and you do your 8-hour-a-day job that you don't like very much. You come home, you don't have a hell of a lot of money. You have to scrimp and save to some extent. It just kind of sucks. You may live in a bad neighborhood and have to worry about the crime that's going on around you. Life sometimes, and for a lot of people, just kind of sucks. It's quite possible that you have reached parity. You've reached a point where it sucks for all of us. It just kind of sucks for everybody. And it may be that you've reached that point. It may be that there isn't anything going on here, except that you're now in a position where it sucks. Anyway, going on with Delta Airlines CEO. Last week, excuse me a second. Last week, the Georgia legislature passed a sweeping voter reform that could make it harder for any Georgians, and particularly those in our black and brown communities, to exercise their right to vote. Since the bill's inception, Delta joined with other major Atlanta corporations to work closely with elected officials from both parties to try to remove some of the more egregious measures of the bill. We had some success in eliminating the most suppressive tactics that some had proposed. I have a question here. Why are corporations getting involved in writing laws? Why? Whether it's to further a law that would change your voting rights as opposed to one that does or doesn't. Why Are they involved? This strikes me as something where you could maybe, find a little bit of campaign contributions that would further them getting involved in this. But why? Why should they ever be involved? It begs the question, gee, have these guys been, kind of under the table giving them campaign contributions to write laws that were going to be beneficial for them? And in fact, they had. I'll come back to that in a second. CEO of Delta goes on. However, I need to make it crystal clear that the final bill is unacceptable and does not match Delta's values. The right to vote is sacred. It is detrimental to our democracy, to our and those. I have to make sure I get this right. And those rights not only need to be protected, but easily facilitated in a safe and secure manner. Dude, having been with voting laws like this, basically a half or so of my lifetime, that's how long I've lived in Lincoln now, is about half my lifetime. Having been with this in Nebraska, what are you talking about? What are you babbling about, you idiot? I mean, are you objecting to the fact that nobody has to prove they live there or who they are? And if so, why? Is it because you want to pack votes in some way or another? Could be. So he goes on. After having time to fully understand all that is in the bill, remember he had a statement 5 days before where he praised it largely, said there was stuff that needed to be done, but he was happy about what happened. Oh, now he's found out what's in the bill. After his company and others had worked with these people to craft the legislation, now he's saying, oh, well, I only just now figured out what's in the bill. Okay, so after having time to now fully understand all that is in the bill, coupled with discussions with leaders and employees in the black community, in other words, the woke attacked, it is evident that the bill includes provisions that will make it harder for many underrepresented voters, particularly black voters, to exercise their constitutional right to elect their representatives, and that is wrong. Okay, how? I mean, this is a sort of racism, right? This really is a sort of racism. White people apparently think that black people don't have IDs, that don't have driver's licenses, that can't prove they live somewhere with a, like I do, with a utility bill, right? They don't get water bills, they don't get gas bills, they don't get electricity bills, they don't get cable, they don't get internet bills, they don't get any of those, and they're totally without a driver's license. I'm sorry. I've been briefly in Georgia. You got to have a driver's license. I suspect if you asked the average black person, they'd say, yes, I have a driver's license. Yes, I get bills. Yes, I can prove this stuff. Who exactly is being underrepresented here? He goes on. The entire rationale for this bill was based on a lie that there was widespread voter fraud in Georgia in the 2020 elections. This is simply not true. Unfortunately, that excuse is being used in states across the nation that are attempting to pass similar legislation to restrict voting rights. Again, I live in a state that has nearly this exact same voting laws and has for 45 years or so, at least. Nobody's complaining about it here. I mean, people who are here that are black, brown, yellow, or whatever, white, we all have driver's licenses. You can't get around here without one. And we all get bills. You can't survive without getting bills. What the hell is he talking about? Exactly. Oh, nobody. What happened was he was attacked by the woke and decided that he had to do something and make a statement. Going on, he says, there is much more work ahead and many more opportunities to have an impact. I want the entire Delta family to know that we stand together in our commitment to protect and facilitate your precious right to vote. That's why we invested heavily in our Get Out the Vote efforts last year, and we can all be proud of Delta's contribution to the historic voter turnout in 2020. Well, okay, if you don't have to prove who you are, I guess that would be pretty historic. As I say, we don't really know who won that election. It may very well have been Biden had won it, but we don't know, was what I tried to tell my senator. And he blew it off, and now it's over. There's nothing left. He goes on, in the weeks and months ahead, we will be working with leaders across the political spectrum in states nationwide in this effort. Why? Why is a company allowed to work with crafting legislation in any government, federal, state, local, at all? Why is a company allowed to do that? Because you can be absolutely certain that whatever they get involved in, they're going to write a law that benefits them, probably at the expense of everybody else. It's ridiculous. You shouldn't even have that. It shouldn't even be a possibility. We're also closely monitoring, he goes on, the legislation in Congress named after the late Atlanta civil rights hero, Delta friend, John Lewis, that will expand voting rights nationwide and working with representatives and senators that represent our communities. Again, why? Why is a company, why is a corporation being allowed to influence any kind of legislation? Because you can be sure that if they do, they're going to write legislation that benefits them. He goes on, I know this result in Georgia has caused frustration, anger, and pain from many members in our Delta family. Yes, because you got attacked by the woke and decided that you had to do something. Goes on, I commit to you that as we move forward, Delta will continue to do everything in our power to hear and protect your voice and rights, both in Georgia and nationwide. Why? You're an airplane company. You're an you fly people from point A to point B. Why should it matter? Why should you be involved in doing anything in terms of government? Why? Makes no damn sense at all. And finally, his last paragraph. Thank you for all you do in your communities, your loved ones, and for our Delta family every day. Ed. Jason Hand says, Machine Town. Oh, I already read that, I think so. The Georgia House, it isn't law yet, but the Georgia House has introduced legislation that would strip Delta Airlines of millions of dollars in tax breaks. That's a big deal because Atlanta is a huge hub for Delta. You know, you get into like Chicago, gigantic hub for United, right? So giving them tax breaks means it's easier for them to do business there. My question is, why did they have the tax breaks in the first place? What was the rationale? Because as a libertarian, I can't think of one. What was the rationale for taking individuals' tax money and using them in that way, giving tax breaks to some corporation? My feeling always is that if you can't make it as a business without going with your hand out to government, then you probably shouldn't be in business. You should be able to make your product or service stand on its own. And if you can't, you're a terrible business. And in any case, these things just shouldn't have been done. I guarantee you with those things originally, what happened was somebody handed someone a bribe, a campaign contribution that got that into legislation. I'm dead certain. Jason Hand says, Section 230, case in point. I'm not sure what you're talking about with that one. In addition to Delta, Coca-Cola came out with a statement. They're based in there or have large offices there. They said, quote, voting is a foundational right in America, and we have long championed efforts to make it easier to vote. We want to be crystal clear and want to make sure, and state unambiguously that we are disappointed in the outcome of the Georgia voting legislation. Throughout Georgia's legislative session, we have provided feedback to members of both legislative chambers and political parties opposing measures in the bill that would diminish or deter access to voting. Again, what it does that? We have had this in place in Nebraska basically my entire adult life. Nobody's complaining because everybody has a driver's license. Everybody who can vote, 16 and up, age 15, you can get a learner's permit. Before that, if you're working on an agricultural area, as long as you're on your own property, you can drive whatever you want. I learned to drive a pickup when I was 12 out at my grandparents' ranch. But age 15, you can get a learner's. Actually, I think there's a provisional learner's permit at age 14 that applies only if you're doing agricultural work. But everywhere else, you get 15 for a learner's permit, and then you go and spend a bunch of time in high school. They teach in high school, driver's ed, and after that, sometimes you can take that driver's ed experience, if you did well on the tests and everything, and apply it towards getting your license. But even so, like me, if I'm going to go get a license, and I did have to when I moved here from Iowa, then I go. In my case, I had to take a test. I had no accidents. I have a very good driving record, no accidents. So I didn't have to drive. I just had to take the test. Boom, got it. I'm out. That's how easy it is to get a driver's license in Nebraska. It's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. Oh, and I have a spammer over on Twitter telling me to buy followers. Yeah, sure. Yeah, as if I had the money to buy anyone. Anyway, going on, the Coca-Cola CEO said, our approach has always been to work with stakeholders to advocate for positive change, and we will continue to engage with legislators, advocacy groups, business leaders, and others to work towards ensuring broad access to voting is available to every eligible voter in our home state. Guys, we've had this in Nebraska forever. This is really not a problem. No one who wants to vote is disavowed from voting. Anybody over 18, regardless of who they are, can vote. All they have to have is some kind of identification, like a driver's license, that everyone who is eligible to vote, unless you've been had your license revoked because you're DUI or something like that. But otherwise, every male, female, any color over the age of 16 has a driver's license. He goes on, additionally, sorry, I'm reading this here as it's written. Additionally, our focus is now in supporting federal legislation that protects voting access and addresses voter suppression across the country. We all have a duty to protect everyone's right to vote, and we will continue to stand up for what is right in Georgia and across the USA. Signed, James Quincy, Chairman and CEO of the Coca-Cola Company. All that happened here was the woke came down on him, because apparently it's not enough to just be able to prove who the hell you are before you vote. It's not enough to be able to prove that you live in the locality where you're voting. You got to let anybody in with no identification whatsoever. I'm sorry, that at this stage of the game, that's just ridiculous. Hey, Jeanette, how are you doing tonight? At this stage of the game, that's just utterly ridiculous. Just totally ridiculous. I dislike the fact that we need it, but clearly we do need it. We do need that. We have other people, by the way, who have joined in and chimed in on this because they were attacked by the woke. I'm sure that in real life, none of these people thinks that what's going on here is actually bad. But please, people that have chimed in, other companies, UPS, Home Depot, Porsche Cars, from Porsche Cars North America, excuse me, the Atlanta Falcons, Facebook, Viacom CBS, Citigroup, Cisco, the pharmaceutical company Merck, Microsoft, and American Express, among others, have all chimed in about how terrible this voting law is and how they're going to work to change it. And I can still see absolutely no reason why a company should be engaged in this. To begin with, your company offering a good or a service. Offer your good or service. Just done. Offer your good or service and don't worry about the laws. It's not your place. And if you are getting involved, that says to me that you are bribing people. You probably have done it with other legislation. If not this one, you have quietly handed them a bribe, a campaign contribution, so that they'll make legislation that you like. This looks to me like you're exposing the tip of an iceberg that maybe you don't want exposed, because it says to me that you have not only been involved in this, you've been involved in other legislation. This wouldn't be just a single instance. This is you having contacts and stuff because by virtue of bribing lots of people over a long period of time. That's wrong. That's just wrong. Jason Hand says, example of legislation benefiting corporations, Section 230, immunity for social media platforms. Oh, God, that's what you're talking about. Yes, absolutely. That was, it was ill-conceived at the time and should be taken out now. But it won't, because the, Democrats in particular benefit from the fact that social media went on a campaign of propaganda and election interference. As I say, I can't tell. Just looking at all of the attack vectors that were available, I can't tell who actually won. Maybe it was Biden. Maybe he won. Maybe it was Trump. I don't know. There's no way to say. I'm not about to say that Trump won. I'm not about to say that the election was completely fixed. I think some localities it was. Hard to say. There were so many vectors involved. It's not, there's 2 or 3 in prior elections. With this, there's got to be 10 or 15. And some of them could be exploited in a way that would cause serious, serious problems. That's my general thing on it. These guys should be offering a good or a service. They shouldn't be getting involved in government in any way, shape, matter, or form. They should just not be involved. Period. So, we have, however, a bright spot in all of this, and that is Project Veritas' suit against the New York Times for defamation. Their lawsuit came into being because the New York Times labeled Project Veritas' investigation into illegal ballot harvesting taking place in Minnesota during the 2020 election. They called it deceptive. Well, the New York Times made a motion to dismiss the case, and the judge denied it. Now, that's pretty unusual. Usually what happens is they'll make a motion to dismiss because the fact that they're a news organization and O'Keefe and his company are a news organization, they don't get the same kind of protections against, defamation. However, he let it go because New York Times actually defended the ballot harvesting videos. They said it was deceptive, and they argued that the stories in which they said this were simply, quote, unverifiable expressions of opinion. You know what that says? They are saying exactly what scrolls past in my lower third every single episode, that nothing you see in the press is real. In a news story, they claimed that they were insulated from these charges of defamation because the news article contained unverifiable expressions of opinion in a news article. Project Veritas pointed out that this opinion was printed in the news section of the New York Times, and the court agreed that if a writer interjects an opinion in a news article and will seek to claim legal protection as opinion, it stands to reason that the writer should have an obligation to alert the reader that it is opinion. The Times did not do so, and the court found this troubling. So the court found Project Veritas had demonstrated a substantial basis in law and fact that the defendant, the New York Times, acted with actual malice, that is, with knowledge that the statement in the articles were false or made with reckless disregard of whether or not they were true or false. and that Project Veritas should be continued to conduct discovery. That's important. I'm not an attorney here, not a lawyer at all. But the fact that they get to the discovery part of it is just amazing, because the discovery means that they can go in to the New York Times, look at their records, look at memos that have been going back and forth. And I am going to tell you, they are going to find information about where editors and reporters had explicitly been communicating with each other about how to smear Project Veritas. I'm dead certain that'll come out. And why? Because nothing you see in the press is real. Nothing. For the benefit of new viewers who may not know, for the last 41 years now, I have been debunking the press. It's a very masochistic hobby. I started doing this because the first time I was interviewed for the local newspaper, the Lincoln Journal-Star, I gave a quote that at that time and at that place would have been a little bit on the scandalous side. And so the reporter asked if she could substitute a quote for this. And I understood her position, so I said yes. A few years later, Deborah Winger and several other fairly big-name stars came to Lincoln, Nebraska to do some shooting of Terms of Endearment, the film Terms of Endearment, on location in Lincoln. You know, Lincoln at that time was only 150,000 people. It's not a big city, particularly when compared to Los Angeles, which is where she was from. And they had a press conference followed by a reception that was only supposed to be attended by the press. So a friend of mine and I, we were both actors at the time, a friend of mine and I forged press credentials that looked like we came from some podunk college out in western Nebraska. And so we got to go in. Well, here's what happened. Deborah Winger had just barely gotten into town. She'd gotten into the Lincoln, Nebraska regional airport, which is nothing. A very small airport, really. Got in there, got in a limo, drove through parts of Lincoln, the biggest streets and stuff, got to the ballroom, got to the hotel, was shown into the ballroom, sat down in a chair. That was the extent of anything she'd seen of Lincoln. What she said, somebody, people ask the usual dumb questions, blah, 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 blah. Somebody said, asked the question, what are you going to do when you're not shooting? And she said, I don't know. Is there anything to do? Well, okay, this is a reasonable question to ask under the circumstances. However, it is not the politic question to answer. It's not a political answer for anywhere. Performers have figured this out a long time ago. You come up with pat answers like, and this is what she really should have said. If I was her, this is what I would have said. Well, I've really only seen Lincoln from the air and a little bit on the ground on my way here, but, it looks like a really beautiful city, and I'm really anxious to get out and see what's out there. Who wants to show me around? Hold for the flash of the cameras with that big smile. That's what she should have said, but she didn't. And what happened was the next day, every newspaper, every TV news, which is really all we had back then, crucified her. They said that she was a drunken whore at the reception, and she was not. I was there. She was a little tipsy. She'd had something on the plane. There was no question of that. But she wasn't doing anything a sober person wouldn't do. But they all claimed that she was a drunken whore who'd hit on every man present at that reception, and that by saying something bad about Lincoln that was, is there anything to do, meaning, there's nothing to do, was not only bad for Lincoln, it was indicative of the entire state. And so everybody should be mad at her. The weirdest thing is they just total smear job. And the weirdest thing was they didn't get together. They each took this one little opening that she had and manufactured a story designed to sell them ad time and newspapers. It had no basis in reality. I was freaking there. No basis at all. So the weird thing is that she actually liked Lincoln. She had a romantic relationship with Nebraska's Governor Bob Carey. She came to Lincoln all the time. She stayed with him in the governor's mansion as a matter of course. She showed up all the time. She hated the place. She wouldn't have done that. She went on with him for a number of years, I think, after he was out of office, in fact. She liked Lincoln. And over time, the local press warmed to her to the point where she sort of became our movie star. And it's that fact that I think propelled Bob Carey to the U.S. Senate. He wasn't that great a guy, But I think the fact that he was the boyfriend of our movie star kind of moved him forward. Then later on, I was working at a summer stock theater along the Mississippi River in Clinton, Iowa. The Clinton Herald had made, apparently I was told this in advance, they interviewed a cast member, a crew member, like once a week for the entire 3 months we're there. And they told us in advance, they said, the person who writes these likes to write hit pieces. Be very careful about what you said. Well, I thought I was being careful, but I wasn't. I said, I don't remember what I said, but she turned it into a hit piece on me. Just took what little opening I'd given her and turned it into a giant hit piece, not only on me, but the entire theater company. And then later on, I did a bunch of different things with the press throughout the years. And at no time has anything that I've ever been involved with the press in actually been factually accurate. It's not what they do. And I did things with CNN. I did stuff with the Chicago Sun-Times. Everywhere in between. And no one ever has gotten it right. Not once. It's why I have an open challenge to my viewers. You provide me with any print article from any news source. It needs to be print because I want to be able to show it up here. And I will not look at it. I will go on a stream and I will spend time debunking it because I can prove one of three things. I'm dead certain I've done it with every single news article I've ever read. That either the event being reported never happened, that it didn't happen as reported, or that when you strip away all of the emotionally loaded language, slick interface, opinions, of which there is always a ton, you find you've only got a couple to 3 paragraphs left at best. So if you want me to do that, hey, drop it in the comments. I will do it. The last time I did it was with a weather report. That shows you how bad they are. Nothing you see in the press is real. Nothing. Jason Ann says, we have to show ID, date of birth, address, name to get ticked off the electoral roll prior to being issued a ballot at the polling station, and it's mandatory here. So we get fined if you don't vote all elections. In all honesty, Americans are so uneducated. I'd like to actually make it harder. I'd like to actually make it harder to vote. If it was me, I would say, okay, let's give them a test. Let's give them a test on the Constitution to start with. If you're going to vote in a federal election, let's give them a test on the federal Constitution. If you're going to vote in a local election, let's give them a test on the state Constitution. Then we give them a test to see if they know who is on the ballot. And if you can't name the people on the ballot for every single office that's under consideration, you're gone. If you can't pass the tests on the Constitution, you're gone. And, for that matter, I would also put if there's any ballot initiatives that you're voting on. If you don't know what they are, if you don't walk into the polling place knowing in advance what those things are, pitched out. Those are people who shouldn't be making any kind of decisions. Sorry, I neglected to mute the wrong thing. Pardon me. Those are people who shouldn't be making decisions, period. End of story. They should not be making decisions. They shouldn't be voting. That's what I would do. I would make it more difficult by virtue of testing them to see if they first even knew what the hell they were voting for. And if you don't know, you shouldn't be voting. But in terms of ID, yes, Nebraska has had this. I don't see anybody complaining, whether they're black, white, brown, green, it doesn't matter. They don't care because everybody has a driver's license. Everybody gets bills. We can prove who we are easily, simply. It's ridiculous. To object to voter law in Georgia when it's almost identical to the way it is in Nebraska is just ridiculous. Okay. That's the voting stuff going on there. If you want to fight this, I would suggest that you not do business with the Delta Airlines. There are always alternatives. Coca-Cola products, there are always alternative to Coca-Cola products. Not watch Major League Baseball, there are alternatives to Major League Baseball. You do not do business, difficult as it is, with UPS, Home Depot, the Porsche Cars North America. Not a lot of people buying those. The Atlanta Falcons, don't go to their games. Get off of Facebook if it's at all humanly possible. Don't do anything with Paramount Plus because that has Viacom CBS behind it. Take your money out of Citigroup. Don't use Cisco products whenever possible. I know that's tough. Cisco pretty much is the internet under the hood, but they're getting into this. Sesame, you don't want to do business with them. You don't want to do business with the pharmaceutical company Merck. You don't want to do business with Microsoft nor American Express. They're the ones I know for a fact that are trying to screw with legislation inside Georgia that they have no good reason to screw with. The fact that they interfere with the elections at all tells me that this is something they've been doing, right? If they're going to fool with a law like this, it means that they've been fooling with laws in other places that probably are designed to give them an advantage. And that's wrong. That's just wrong. So, going to talk a little bit, been about 2 hours. I'm going to talk a bit about the woke again. Because the woke are tacitly supporting, I guess what you could call inappropriate familial relations in Star Trek Picard. In Picard this last season, we had two Romulan characters, Narek and his sister Narissa. They gave off, if you were watching it for any length of time, and I stopped. I bailed after they ripped Egypt's eye out of his socket graphically live in full view. I bailed after that, screw this. But the entire time prior to that, however, those two characters were giving off a very creepy incest vibe. Sorry. Oh, God, I said the word. I could get if suddenly I shouldn't have said that word because YouTube watches for it. I have had my stream chopped off in the middle because they're watching everything. If it disappears over on YouTube, go over to Twitch. It's twitch.tv/SYL Ranch. So I'm a little nervous now. But it gave off a really, really creepy vibe of inappropriate familial relationships. The producer, Akiva Goldman, I now discovered, wanted it to be outright familial intimate relations. Actually outright. I have seen a screen cap of him talking about it. Apparently he wanted to do it, and somebody had the good sense to say, God, no, we can't do that. But they still directed and written to give off this very creepy vibe. I certainly noticed it before I bailed on this show. Now, unfortunately, I can't find the tweet where he said this. I have seen a screen cap of it. It was stupid of me not to pull it down because, unlike reporters, I like to source my information. And not being able to source it bothers me quite a lot. I know that I saw it. I just can't get a copy for you. I can't source it, so I'm sorry. It's damn stupid on my part. I want to source things because I'm not the press. Unfortunately, this is one of those very, very few instances where I'm going to ask you to trust me on this one. I saw it. I should have pulled it down. If you've got a copy, if any of my viewers got a copy, let me know. Send an email or drop a comment to where it is. You may not be able to post the URL. So if you want to send an email to callin@sylranch.tv, I'll get it. I really like to find a copy of it, and I wasn't able to prior to starting the stream. But I really like to source these things so that I don't look like, hey, I'm just talking out of my behind. But he was really explicit about wanting it to be that way. And the woke are fine with it. Because modern Star Trek made by Alex Kurtzman, if it's got his name on it, it probably means that it's very, very woke. It's like Batwoman. It's written for woke people. It's not very well written. None of it has been. It's just written for people who are woke, who want to see, push a woke agenda and stuff like that. It's clear. It's obvious that that's what it's for. So, if you got it, let me know. But if you're woke, just remember And if you're watching and supporting and paying Paramount Plus to see their Star Trek products, you are, in fact, tacitly endorsing inappropriate familial relationships. Really, really inappropriate. Jason Hand said, how about the term inappropriate fondness or affection? That'll work too, yes. Inappropriate, intimate fondness and affection. Yeah. The other thing is, I have to bring this up. When the whole issue of gay marriage was being bounced around a lot in the 2000s, 2010s, because that's where most of the conversation happened. People who were against gay marriage, and again, for me, marriage is a non-issue. It's not a matter of getting permission from a government to say that you're married. If you can find someone who will perform a reasonable ceremony, you're married as far as I'm concerned. But because it had issues in legal, in family law and legal aspects, they wanted the government-issued permit to prove that they were married. When that was all going down, what a lot of people were objecting to on that is, if you let homosexuals marry, it's going to open the floodgates for all kinds of other things. I thought it was nonsensical. Turns out they were right. Hey, Bulldog 1992, a nice Bulldogs 1992 looks like. Nice to see you, glad to have you here. But they turned out to be right. If you just look at what the woke are behind now, they're behind an extraordinary level of gender redefinition to the point where I think, honestly, you're dealing with real mental illnesses. There's a certain level of that makes sense to me, but a lot of it is just mental illness. And it will not do anybody any good, psychologically, to, promote that, to, say, hey, that's great in your own life. I think it leads to suicide, ultimately. So I don't think that's good, but it opened the floodgates for that. And now it has opened the floodgates for inappropriate familial fondness or affection. You guys have proven the people who said that gay marriage was a bad idea. You have proven them right. Think about that for a moment when you're sitting there and you're watching these, inappropriate familial relationships, when you're watching the severed infant heads, when you're watching the beheadings. Keep in mind that you are proving the point, right? You need to back off a bit, right? You need to say, oh, okay, wait a minute. We got to draw the line somewhere. And that inappropriate fondness or affection for a family member is where you should draw it. At least there, if not some other places where you choose not to draw it. But my God, at least there. There is no excuse for wanting that. There's no excuse. It's one of the reasons that I don't watch Kurtztrek. I'll tell you honestly, I will probably, I can't imagine, I may watch first couple of episodes of Star Trek Picard Season 2 just to see if they've maybe turned something around. Oh, God, they're going to bring Q in. I can only imagine how they're going to frack that character up. But they're going to bring Q in and screw him up, I'm certain, in a woke way. And I'll probably watch a couple of episodes of that. I will almost certainly watch STD. There's some other series, Strange New Worlds. My general feeling about it is, right, fool me once, shame on you with STD. Fool me twice, shame on me with STP. Fool me thrice, and I'm a complete moron. I'm expecting absolutely nothing good to come out of Strange New Worlds because it's got Alex Kurtzman, that no-talent hack's name on it. I'm expecting the same crap, and I'd be stunned if it was any different. There's, Lower Decks coming back, and now this Star Trek Prodigy. What I can tell you is I have been with this franchise for 56 freaking years, and I can't look away from the damned train wreck. But what I don't do is pay for it. And I don't do anything like torrenting for pirating. There are all kinds of ways that you can find stuff like that for nothing. And I certainly suggest that if, like me, you can't cost justify 10 different services to get 1 or 2 shows on each of the service that you like, go to duckduckgo.com, enter the search terms, watch, space, quotes, whatever it is you want to watch, end quotes, online, free. Make sure you have really aggressive ad blockers, because I ain't going to take any, I'm not going to take any kind of responsibility for what happens to you if you don't. Make sure you have really effective ad blockers. Type that in and see what you get back, because you're going to find within a couple of hours of them having dropped that there are 1 million different places that are hosting them. I don't pay money for it. I'm waiting for these guys to just fall through of their own accord. So, and I'll tell you what, it's about 2 hours after. I'm not seeing a ton of people in my chat here. So don't do business with those people who are doing things that are objectionable, that shouldn't be objectionable. Just do what you're going to do without those services. So I would have to say that is all that I have to say about that. I would love to keep the conversation going. So, I got something from Jason here. It was better when TV didn't outright make a person's personal attitudes, for lack of a better word, an important issue for the show. Male, female, or otherwise could be a fan or be attracted to the person. Yeah, I mean, the thing about it is, right, Star Trek does have a certain level of political liberalism and political commentary just built into it. It's been in its DNA since, day one. But the way they did it was generally pretty straightforward. At that time, right, having a black woman on the ship as an officer was pretty unusual, right? That was a time period where I was born, and that was a time period where the N-word was consistently used, where it was not unusual to refer to a black man as a boy. To get the boy over there to do it, right? That was normal. It wasn't for another 10 years that got pushed out of the public lexicon. So to have a black woman there was pretty amazing. Anti-Japanese sentiment ran really high because, the people who are writing that show and a lot of the actors and stuff have been involved in World War II. To his dying day, my grandfather, who fought in the Pacific, from time to time, he would use the term Jap. He tried towards the end. He would try to say Japanese, but every once in a while, if he wasn't thinking hard about it, he'd say the Japs. So there was a lot of anti-Japanese sentiment. But to have a Japanese man on there as an important, not important, but helmsman, occasionally took over the center seat, that was a big deal. And it was the middle of the Cold War, right? So anti-Russian sentiment was always very high. So to have a Russian on there as well, big deal. Not as big a deal for a Scotsman, but what it did tell you was that all of these different people meant that we had a united Earth, and that all of these problems had long since been solved. And we never brought it up. Nobody ever said anything about Uhura because she was black, except on one occasion where it made perfect sense. They were dealing with what appeared to be President Lincoln, and he made a remark about her race. And that is the only time. And the reason that he made it was it gave her an opportunity to say, we've moved beyond all that. He called her a negress and then apologized. He said, we've moved beyond that. It's no big deal. Well, those are just words. That's the only time it came up. They made the statement by not making a statement. They just had these people who in current times could not live and work together well, and they made a statement by not making a statement about it. Jeanette says, sorry, Bill. Oh, you've been and gone or leaving? Sorry to see that, either way. But that's how they made their statements, by not making a statement about it, by not talking about it, by being a non-issue. So if you want to do this stuff, you don't have to throw it in everybody's face. You just, okay, this is the way things work, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't have to be out there so that everybody can see, oh, look, we're looking at non-binary. And non-binary is one of those ones where I have to say, I'm sorry if you're non-binary. You probably have a psychological problem. You just do. I don't think you're going to be happy. I think you're probably going to ultimately suicide before the age of 40. I say that because I called it with Boy George. Everybody I knew yelled and screamed at me about how I was a homophobe. And I said, there's a man who looks like he's not happy and he's going to suicide. And he did. Looking at the non-binary characters who have come from non-binary, ideas in real life, I got to tell you guys, I think you got something wrong with you. Go see a good therapist, one who will not encourage you to essentially ignore all of your genitalia, to get unnecessary mastectomies and things like that, just so you can say, I'm not really male nor female. That's just not healthy. And I think you're going to end up suiciding because of it. So, excuse me, the way to make the statement is to not make a statement. You just have this as part of every day. Okay, we do this stuff by, and when you get into couples like that, all of Kurt's Trek is soap opera that is really for people who have never had any real responsibility in life. It's for the woke. And so there's a lot of crying, there's a lot of carrying on. It's just ridiculous soap opera crap. You always look at Star Trek Discovery, and they had a very similar situation in Discovery as they did in Star Trek Voyager. The tail end of season 2 and now in season 3 and 4, they were sent to a place where they were never going to be able to come home. They were just never going to be able to come home. And with Voyager, when they started out, it was going to be at least 70 years. A lot of the people who were there were not going to make it home. Their descendants might, but they wouldn't. Things worked out differently, but that's the way it was. But on Discovery, they sit and cry about it. On Voyager, they keep on exploring strange new worlds and seeking out new life and new civilizations like adults. Crying about it is childish. It's just childish. You have something that happens, you go, okay, I'm going to have to adjust to this. You don't spend lots of time whining and, it's like, okay, this thing happened. I've got to adjust to it, as best I can. Be the same person and adjust to it. If all you do is cry, that's stupid. Marshall says, same way JMS pointed out that the LGBTQ representation wasn't in B5. His response was, what do you expect? A crimson G on their forehead? We're beyond that now. Maybe you should move beyond it too. Yes. It's the way you make the statement is not make the statement. I was surprised to discover that Ivana was apparently bisexual, but I didn't care. She was an established character with her own personality. Her sexuality did not define her, other than the fact that she was, in many cases, intentionally avoiding a romantic relationships because it had always turned out badly for her. But sexuality did not define her. That's the problem here. They make the sexuality define the person. And I don't get that. I'll tell you honestly, I have known gay men who define their whole persons as they're homosexual. That is all of what they are. That's the big thing. And I don't get it. I just don't get it. I'm heterosexual, but that doesn't mean that I define myself that way. I have a lot of other stuff going on that, personality-wise, I think defines me. Heterosexuality is just one of those things, but it's not the defining characteristic. And in STD and STP, it's the defining characteristic. And they will cry and whine like little children, and shouldn't. Jason Hand says, one takeaway of current times is so many unhappy people, and virus isolation isn't helping people, their states of mind, including the kids and elderly. It's sad to see. In the U.S., there's been a 100% increase in suicides among young people. That is an actual statistic, 100%. There are now double the number of people, young people committing suicide than there was before the isolation began. And I'm sure that's the case with other people. It's different for me and my mom. We're both extreme introverts. being in the house is kind of the way we would be anyway. With the exception of my now being able to go to the gym and get rid of some of what has piled on me in the last year, because the gyms have been closed. But I can go to the gym now. But aside from that, I'm pretty much at home. But I get that most people aren't like that. Most people need a lot more human contact than I do. And I am absolutely certain it's not doing their psyches any good whatsoever. This has been a bad thing. As I mentioned earlier, this has been people just turning over their freedoms and becoming slaves as a consequence. And I don't see that changing. As I said, people have told me, veterans have told me, if they do certain things, then it's the trigger point and we will do something. And then it happens and they move the trigger point. They move the tripwire and the tripwire gets tripped and they said, we'll move it over here. And the tripwire gets tripped and we'll move it over here. I do not for a moment believe that they're going to do a damned thing. We are screwed, and that is that. Let's see, Jason Hand say character of the person as a whole. Yeah, not whether they're compelling in the shows. Yeah, it's about the character of the person as a whole, not whether they're compelling in the shows. Yeah. It's not enough for me, to say, okay, I'm gay. That's my character. I'm gay. That's your character. You have no other, wants or desires or objectives or anything like that. You're just gay? Really? That's it? Just gay? Oh, you're non-binary? That's it? That's all you are? That's the only thing you're ever going to do? You don't really have any, objectives and future goals and things like that? You have nothing? You have no defining characteristics other than that one thing. It is just wokeness at its finest. Thought I was going to have to change it. I tried to swallow tried to breathe a little water. Anyway, it's about 11:20. That's 2.5 hours. Probably a good time to shut her down. I've noticed that if they're less than 3 hours, they tend to be a little bit more approachable for people to watch after the fact. So I would have to say that is all that I have to say about that. I would love to keep the conversation going, so please leave your comments, questions, and nasty remarks, and I'll do my best to respond to you. And of course, please like, sub, hit the notification bell, and share me on social media, because that's how I grow. So thanks for watching this episode of Tales from SYL Ranch, where everyone is entitled to my opinion. And I'm Bill Stone.
Ultimate power in this world has always been one simple thing: the control and manipulation of minds.